Good morning. Welcome to today's webinar on the Early Intervention Rule for System of Payments, Part 2. This is Lori Myers, and I'm the Early Intervention Training Coordinator. Also with me is Tracy Cassee, who is our EI Resource Manager, and she will be the content expert today. As I mentioned, today is Part 2 of our System of Payments discussion, where we'll talk about requirements when a System of Payments provider is involved. Our goal for today is to review the changes to the rule and go over some highlights. We didn't receive any questions in advance, but you can feel free to submit your questions during the session today. We will most likely not answer them today, but we'll research the answers and then we'll post them in an FAQ that will be on our website. So to communicate during our session today, you're going to use your chat box or questions box on the dashboard. And you may not have access to both of those, but either one will work, either the chat or the questions box. And I will be monitoring those to gather people's questions and comments. You can also use those boxes if you have an issue with the technology. So if there's an audio or video problem, let us know and we'll try to troubleshoot that for you. We're also going to be using some polls during the presentation, and when it's time for a poll, you'll see the question pop up on your screen with the different answers, and you just click in the button next to your answer choice. Those answers will be anonymous, but we'll be able to see a percentage of people who selected each answer. So those will be like knowledge checks to kind of gauge how you're doing throughout the presentation. We do have certificates for you today in your handout section of the dashboard. And at the end of the session, I will give you a code that you'll need to put on the certificate. So you'll be able to print those for yourself and then just enter the code on the certificate. I will also ask you at the end to sign in electronically, and you'll do that by typing your name, county, and role in the chat box or the questions box, and including the names of everybody participating in your group if you're watching together. I will also be repeating all these instructions at the end, so if you missed any of them, don't worry about it. We'll definitely go over those again. We've also got a couple other things in the handout section. There's a course evaluation that we'd like you to fill out at the end, and you'll send those to Shaquila, who is our administrative assistant. She tracks those for us. And there's also a handout of the PowerPoint slides. So if you would like to follow along and use those as we're going through, feel free to download or print those for yourself. All right, so with all those housekeeping details out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and move on. We wanted to remind you about where you can find resources for all of this information that we're going over today. So we have a System of Payments page on our website, and the website is ohioearlyintervention.org, and you would go to this yellow Providers tab, and then there's a tile called System of Payments. You would click there, and then it would take you to this page here. And you can see you have several options, System of Payment training and guidance. So that's where you would find past PowerPoints and materials from trainings we've done over the last couple years. You have a section for service providers, and then you have a section for service coordinators. And we'll be showing you a couple of the resources later in today's session that we found to be particularly helpful. So just keep that in mind that these resources are there. We also have resources for all of the new rules and the new forms under our EI Rules 2019 tile. So if you would click back from this page, again under that Providers tab, you'll see EI Rules 2019, and that's where we have the forms and rules posted, the recordings of our rule webinars, FAQs, and other guidance documents. All right, so we are actually going to start with one of our polls, and this is just to kind of get an idea of how you're feeling with explaining EME to the family, because that's something we'll spend a good amount of time on today. So are you feeling very comfortable, somewhat comfortable, or not comfortable at all? I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll, and then if you'll please vote for me. I'll give you a few seconds to do that. All right, over half of you have voted, so I'm just going to give it about 5 more seconds. All right. So, Tracy, do we want to share those results or kind of wait until a little bit later?
We can go ahead and share those results now.
Okay. So we only have about 7% of you that said you're very comfortable with this. 60% said somewhat comfortable and 32% not comfortable at all. So an important goal for us today will be to hopefully bump you up into that at least somewhat comfortable and hopefully very comfortable area. So thank you for participating in that. That gives us a lot of good information. And then to kind of go along with that, we would like to have a quick chat. So if there's anybody that does have some thoughts about how you introduce this to the families and how you talk about it, if you will go ahead and type that into the chat box. Anybody that wants to share your thoughts, we would greatly appreciate that. And then we will share those comments a little bit later on, and eventually we'll make them available to the field. The idea is for us to have some conversation starters, some tips for those of you that are struggling. So I'll give you a few minutes to type in any comments you have. All right, Tracy, we're getting some good suggestions.
Okay, awesome.
All right, so thank you for those comments. We will come back to them a little bit later on, and you can feel free to keep typing those in, but I think I will go ahead and move ahead and turn things over to Tracy.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to part 2. Hopefully, as we move through this process of the EME and what happens with families who are able to pay, you'll feel a little bit more comfortable in explaining this to families and understanding the forms. So let's go ahead and get started. So if a family has been determined able to pay but has extraordinary medical expenses, they can be determined unable to pay by the department. This process happens after signing the IFSP using forms EI-17, which is the Extraordinary Medical Expense Worksheet, and EI-18, which is the Family Out-of-Pocket Medical Expense Tracking Sheet. Now, this is used for families who have been determined able to pay and who are likely to exceed the 55 units of early intervention services at no cost in the IFSP year. So let's go ahead and take a look at Form EI-17, and I'll start moving you through this process. So as we talked on Tuesday, you will be determining families able or unable to pay using EI 15. If a family has been determined able to pay, it's important to explain to the family that there still is a way that they can be determined unable to pay by the department. And there is a handout on the website in the SOP section under Service Coordinator Tools that you can give to the family that kind of explains how they can be determined unable to pay. So the definition of extraordinary medical expenses is in the System of Payments rule. Families must meet these rule requirements to meet a threshold of being determined to have extraordinary medical expenses. Note that the definition of extraordinary medical expenses allows for family medical costs to be documented by the family and calculated for determination of the inability to pay by DOD. On the EI website, under the Provider System of Payment Service Coordinators, you will find an EME workshop or worksheet tool. That tool will calculate the amount that meets the EME requirements for the family's income, along with an income chart if you want to do it by yourself. So we've given you kind of two options on determining what the EME amount, the amount of out-of-pocket medical expenses that the family has to meet in order to be determined unable to pay. So the EI 17 is a form that you need to complete. And it should look familiar to you because the top part is exactly what you're doing with the EI 15 in determining whether or not the family is able to pay. So you're going to take the family's income, the gross amount, and you are going to look at the income chart that is found on the website or on the worksheet, and you're going to multiply the family's income by the percentage that their income falls in between. So, for example, if a family, let's just say a family of 5 and their income is $81,000. On the chart, you are going to find the family of 5, you're going to find the $81,000, and that income amount is going to fall between two percentages. And then you're going to be able to coordinate that with the percentage, anywhere between 1% and 8%, and multiply that by the annual income, and that's going to be the family's amount that they need to collect and pay out of pocket before they will be determined unable to pay. Now, my explanation was very confusing, but if you look at the chart, it's not that confusing and it's not that difficult. If you are good at math, you can figure this out on your own just by doing the multiplication. If
Tracy?
Yes.
Do you want me to pull up that chart so we can look at it?
You know what, Lori, I was thinking that might be a good idea.
Okay.
It's one of these things that it's an afterthought, like, ooh, we should have added that.
Right. All right, so we're going to go to System of Payments and Service Coordinator section. And
it's right above the POLR.
Which one?
Right above the POLR. Yep.
Okay. Sometimes it takes a second.
What's really nice about having this income worksheet on the website is you are able to direct your families very early on in the process if they are curious as to what their pay down amount is or what their EME amount is. They can go on here on their own and figure it out. So you can see it's got the percentages on the right hand side. So if the family's income is between 211% and 220%, you're going to multiply the income by 2%. So Lori, let's say the family's income is scroll down just a little bit more. Down to the next chart. Yeah. So let's say we have a family of 4, and the family income is $74,200. So what we're going to do is you're going to come down and you're going to see that $74,200 is between 300 and 301%. So you're going to scroll back up. Fine. Oh, and of course I pick one that's between 300
on the borderline.
Yeah, let's say it's between let's say 271% to 300%.
Okay.
And let's put $76,500 in there.
Oh. Okay. 76,500.
And just hit enter. So what you've just determined is that a family with this total gross income has a EME in the amount of $4,590. Now, it is perfectly okay for you to go to the website, have this form do the math for you, and then transfer it on to the EI-17. So once you have determined that the family's EME is $4,590, you're going to, I'm going back to the form now, Lori. You're going to go ahead and put that on the form, and then you are going to sign it, and you are going to let the family know that this has been determined that this is their out-of-pocket medical expense that they can meet in order to be determined unable to pay. And once they are determined unable to pay, then their early intervention services will be provided at no cost to them until their next annual.
So Tracy, we do have a couple questions just about using that worksheet. Aaron wanted to know, what if you do get an income that falls between the percentages? Do you calculate them both? And
I have yet to see an income that that falls in between those two percentages. So that's a really good question, because all the numbers that we have ever played with has never fallen into the percentage and into the example that I just gave you. that was just a really weird. So if that would happen, shoot me an email and we'll take a look at it.
Okay. And then Robin wanted to know what year of FPL will be used. Is it 2017, or will that be updated?
It is going to be updated. As a matter of fact, I have updated it. So as of July 1st, we will be using FPL 2019. That is a reason why we have pulled those tables off of the forms so that we can update it every year. So you will need to go to the website and either use the tool or print off the current federal poverty level charts for determining the family able or unable to pay and determining what the family's EME would be.
All right, I think we're good.
Okay. Okay, Lori, it looks like we have another poll.
Okay. So this is a knowledge check for you. And the question is, when can the family start collecting their medical expenses? So when do they start gathering that information? Is it 12 months prior to the signing of their IFSP? Is it after the initial 55 hours have been exhausted? Or is it after the initial or annual IFSP is signed? So I'm going to go ahead and open that poll. So we have about half of you have voted, so I'm going to give you about 10, 15 more seconds. All right. So it looks like most of you, 75%, are saying after the initial or annual IFSP is signed. And then we had 10% that said A, 12 months prior, and 14% said after the initial 55 hours have been exhausted.
Okay, so 75% of you are correct. Families can start collecting their out-of-pocket medical expenses as soon as their initial or annual IFSP has been signed. So again, this is only for families who have been determined able to pay and are likely to exceed their 55 hours. So these are your high intensity families who are receiving a lot of services, excuse me, very quickly to exceed their initial 55 hours of early intervention services. So as soon as the family has signed their initial or annual IFSP, they are able to start documenting their medical expenses using EI-18. This is a spreadsheet. Lori, next slide, please.
Okay.
So this is a spreadsheet or a form that you can give the family. It has the medical expense amount on there, so the family knows what amount they need to meet, and then they will just start documenting their out-of-pocket expenses. Now this is the actual medical expenses for the people in the family that the parents had identified in their family unit. So remember we asked them how many are in your family unit, and if they say 5 people, then they can collect the medical expenses for all 5 of those people. Receipts are needed for anything over $100. and they need to be attached to this form in order to be determined unable to pay. Families can use their health insurance premiums, and if they choose to use their health insurance premiums and their premium is over $100, they will need to attach their pay stubs to document those premiums. If they're picking up prescriptions for $5, we don't need receipts for that. All they need to do is document on this form that on this date, for this reason, they paid $5 to a prescription. Excuse me. Once the family has documented all of their medical expenses, they can stop when they reach that amount. The family will give the service coordinator this form with the attached receipts, and then the service coordinator will forward that to me for the family to be determined able or unable to pay. Now, this is a really important point here. As a service coordinator, you can look at this form and you can double check it, and you can say, oh yeah, you're unable to pay, but you do not have the authority to do that. It has to be submitted here at the department, and then it needs to be reviewed by the department, and then the department goes ahead and will get back with you with the date that the family has been determined unable to pay. The reason that is because some receipts are not acceptable. Some of the there may be an error in the math. They may not have submitted all of their receipts. So we basically are taking that responsibility from you, and we will determine that all the medical expenses are appropriate, that it meets the definition, and then you will in return receive a date that family has been determined unable to pay, and that their medical or that their early intervention expenses will become at no cost to them.
Tracy?
Yes.
Just wondered if you would comment about how often this is needed and what's an example. I just have gotten a couple comments from counties that said they've never had to do this, and they're trying to kind of put their heads around when this would be.
I would say 99% of our families will never touch this. This is, again, for those high intensity families that are determined able to pay and that need a lot of services that are outside of what the county board can provide. So the most common example of this would be an able to pay family who has been receiving maybe 4 months of services with the county board, and then gets a diagnosis of autism, and the team decides that a higher intensity of services is needed. ABA, for example, or maybe an increase in, I don't know, whatever other of the 18 services are needed for that child. But it is a POLR provider, and it is going to eat up the initial 55 hours. Family in 4 months may have already used 20 hours of their 55, so now we're going to ABA at 10 hours a week, and they only have 35 hours plus for the ABA plus maybe their developmental specialist or their speech therapist, whoever their PSP is. So this is a very rare situation. However, you need to be able to explain this to parents, and you need to families need to understand that they have this option, because we never know when the diagnosis is coming. We never know if the family is going to be moving to a county that cannot provide the services that you are providing. So it's important that when you have an able to pay family, and this is a suggestion, this isn't enroll, this isn't a you must do, but I think it would be good practice with every family that has been determined able to pay that you are giving them that information sheet on extraordinary medical expenses that explains this to them at the very beginning. Some families are very organized, and if this is an option for them that they may or may not need to use, they may still want to get an envelope or a file folder and be collecting all their out-of-pocket medical expenses just in case. It's an option for families. They need to be informed about it, but very few of our early intervention families will actually have to be determined unable to pay via the EME. Any other questions coming in on that, Lori?
Well, there is a question about families that choose not to share their financial information. So are we using EI 17 in the first 45 days if they're determined able to pay, and if they don't choose to share, we don't complete it, and then they're just able to pay after the 55 units?
So that's a great question. So in the process, how I see that conversation going is if a family decides not to share their information, their financial information, and you determine them able to pay, I think you go on and you explain that if it is needed, if we are going to exceed your 55 hours, that there is an option that you can be determined unable to pay, and we will need to get your financial information to be able to do that. But here is an information sheet on how you can be determined unable to pay and what that looks like. And that's handing the family that that information sheet that's on the website. There is also a link on that sheet that the families can look up on the internet that will take them to that worksheet. So they can kind of figure it out on their own. But in order to be determined unable to pay by the department, they will have to share their financial information. So as you're getting close to the 55 hours, you will have to revisit this with the family, and then it's a family's choice. If the family still doesn't want to share their financial information, then once they hit that 55 hours, they basically are opting not to be determined unable to pay, and they will become their funding source will become parent self-pay at the 56th hour. And that is a parent choice.
Okay. There is a question about EI 18. Should we be checking in with the family about it, or are they just doing it on their own? And when do we collect it? Is it once they've told us they've met the EME amount?
So I think best practice is that if you have a family that is going to be using their 55 hours rather quickly, I think best practice dictates that you should be checking in with the family and seeing where they are on this. The sooner the family submits it to you, so let's say we have an initial IFSP in February, and the family's determined able to pay. The forecast out for services, it's not a high intensity family like ABA, but maybe they're getting more than an hour a week of early intervention services. So we know that probably sometime within 5 to 7 months, they are going to exceed their 55 hours. I would be checking in with the family to see, how they're doing on this, if and where they are. This Once the family meets that dollar amount, absolutely send it in, because that will make your life a little bit easier when you are doing that review of the IFSP, because if the family has met that EME, you don't have to put self-pay on the IFSP because the family's been determined unable to pay. So you can just continue rolling it through with POLR funding, without having to split up the grid to show two funding sources of POLR paying from June 1st to June 28th, and then the parent becoming self-pay from June 29th until December 1st. And then having to go back and do a review to change it back to POLR because the family has submitted the paperwork a week later. So to me, it just makes sense to check in with the family if you know that they are going to be running out of the 55 hours, and just kind of be running tabs and reminding them that as soon as they document their out-of-pocket expenses, we can determine them unable to pay.
Okay. I think maybe we have a couple more questions that we want to look at now, and then the others, thank you for sending those. We'll probably table those until the FAQ. But the ones that we wanted to clarify, one from Tony, she said, Tracy, did you say we collect receipts for insurance premiums?
If the family's premiums are over $100, then the family will need to submit their pay stub to document that amount, because it is over $100. If their premium is $99, then we don't need a receipt. They can just document health insurance premium for the month of, or for the pay period of whatever, $99. We do not need a receipt. We need receipts for everything over $100, including their health insurance premiums. Now, if let's say their health insurance premium is $82 and their dental is $10 and their vision is $15, all of that is under $100, so we don't need a copy of their pay stub, but they should document each of those on there. Health insurance premium, dental premium, vision premium, and make sure that all of those are documented on this form, because it does add up. I have received pay stubs for health insurance premiums over $100, and when looking at it, the vision or the dental or both were not claimed. It was just the health insurance premium and not their other premiums. So when we are looking at expenses, we are looking at vision and dental and contact lenses and prescriptions, and all those things can be documented for the family. But receipts are needed for anything over $100.
And you did all that math in your head.
I know, and I'm a social worker. Woohoo!
I know. All right. So I think maybe we'll look at this one more question from Robin. She wants to know, when a family is determined able to pay on EI-15, and you said they can still be determined unable to pay by looking at the form online, you mean the EME, is that correct? So they might still have a 0 EME depending on their income and family size.
I don't think there will be a 0 EME, because the lowest percentage is a 1%. So depending on their income, I mean, I have seen EMEs as low as $200. But I do not believe that mathematically there will be a 0 EME, but there may be a very, very low EME. But again, as a service coordinator, you cannot determine them unable to pay. You must submit the forms and the receipts or the documentation to the department to get that determination of unable to pay. You will determine them able to pay, but you cannot go through this process. And this is like a little bit of a warning, don't anticipate that they will be determined able to or unable to pay, and tell the family, oh, effective this date, let the provider know, because that could possibly come back, and kind of get you in trouble a little bit, because if there's an error made, or the date that the department determines is different from the date that you have told everybody, that can cause some problems with the billing and the payment.
All right. So Missy and Jessica and Lori and Jennifer, we will look at your questions for the FAQ, and Christy. So I did receive those. Just wanted to let you know, but we'll definitely respond to those later on after today. All right, ready to move on?
Yes. I think it's
Okay.
I think we have another check-in.
I think we do. All right, so this is a true or false. I do not have to worry about the EME until my family has been determined able to pay and has exhausted all of their 55 units. So is that true or false? Okay, we'll give you a few more seconds to respond to that one. All right, thank you for those responses. We have 91% said false and just 9% said true.
We are listening this morning, and we know this. That I'm like sitting here with a huge smile on my face. This statement is false. we have to worry about the EME, I think, for every able to pay family, and give them the opportunity to either start collecting this information, or filing it away in I'm not going to worry about this. But as a service coordinator, as we have previously discussed, we do have to worry about it from day one, and be on top of it, monitoring it based on the situation of the family. But again, this is probably fewer than 2% of our early intervention families. So this is going to be a very, very small percentage. But we do have a lot of families that are determined able to pay. So again, we need to feel comfortable in explaining this and giving them information, but the actual use of it will be very low.
All right. Tracy, I do have a couple questions about the timeline for DODD to make the determination once we've received the EME information.
Per rule, DOD needs to make a determination within 30 days of receiving the receipts and the documentation. So within 30 days, you will have a determination of whether or not the family is able or unable to pay. Now, the date could be 3 months prior to when the family submits it. So the determination date will go back to when the family met the EME. So let's say that the family submits all their receipts and they hit it in, let's say they hit it the beginning of May, but they didn't submit all the paperwork for whatever reason until the middle of June. Just because, things got busy and maybe they had a hard time tracking down a receipt, or getting a statement from a provider. When the determination date is made, it will be the actual date that dollar amount has been made. And I will work with the service coordinators in these dates and with the reviews for the IFSP and the documentation and things along those lines. But there has been some situations where I have not received the paperwork. Like I said, maybe I received it all in February and the determination date was in November. So the family's date that they meet that dollar amount will be the date that is used as their determination date.
All right. I think we're ready to move ahead.
Okay. So we're going to review the rule for the parent cost participation from Part 1. When a parent is unable to pay, an eligible child shall be provided all early intervention services identified as needed in the IFSP, including those early intervention services that exceed 55 units per individualized family service plan year at no cost to the child or to the family. So if a family is determined unable to pay, all EI services in that year are provided at no cost, regardless of who the provider is. When a parent has been determined able to pay, The parent shall be responsible for paying the cost of early intervention services, including their private insurance copays and deductibles, for the IFSP year when services exceed 55 units per individualized family service plan year. So, for able to pay families, for the first 55 hours, their early intervention services are provided to them at no cost. And that includes their copay and any out-of-pocket expenses that they may need or be required to pay if they choose to use their insurance. That is all at no cost to them during the first 55 hours. But once that family meets that 56-hour, able to pay families will be responsible for all costs of their early intervention services. Okay? And those parents shall not be charged more than the actual cost of the early intervention services. And if they have private and public insurance, shall not be charged disproportionately more than a parent without insurance. And that is a conversation that we have with our POLR providers. So that's kind of a summary of the differences between unable to pay and able to pay families. Okay, Lori. So Section H, again, of this rule is procedural safeguards. And a parent contesting the determination of the ability to pay or the imposition of parent cost participation shall be afforded the procedural safeguards set forth in Part C and Rule 5123-10-01 of the Administrative Code, including mediation, state complaint procedures, and due process hearing procedures. In addition, a parent contesting the determination of the parent's ability to pay or the imposition of parent cost participation may request an informal review by the department. Early intervention services shall not be delayed or denied to an eligible child of a parent determined unable to pay for early intervention services in accordance with paragraph D2 of this rule. Early intervention services shall also not be delayed for a able to pay family who may be requesting mediation or may be challenging how they were determined able to pay. So it's real important that these conversations happen with families and that the forms are completed and that your documentation is in place so that if a parent should ask for mediation or file a complaint or question how something was determined, your documentation is there. And that is why the forms are set up that we're asking you to do the math. I'm going to be like a math teacher right now. Show your work and document how you have determined the family either able to pay or unable to pay. So I think let's start looking at the forms. Well, we've already looked at a couple forms, but let's look at EI 16. So EI 16 is formally known as EI 1702. This form is used when a system of payment provider outside of the county board will be providing services. This form has not significantly changed from the previous form. However, there's been a big change in that this form, EI-05, which is the consent to use insurance, and EI-04, the IFSP, must be sent within 30 days of the date of the IFSP signature for POLR funding. So service coordinators have 30 days from the date of the IFSP signature to submit all the paperwork for POLR funding. The Early Intervention Service Coordinator will document this in the Service Coordinator Use Only box at the top of the form. So on the top of the form, you have a place where you can put the date that the form has been submitted to DOD, and then a check mark making sure that the submission is complete with all the needed forms. Your forms need to be current. And what I mean by that is that EI-16 needs to be dated for the current submission. In other words, you can't recycle this form. I did an initial submission in January. Now it's my review in June. We're going to request ongoing POLR funding. I'm just going to make a copy of the form I submitted in January, and I'm going to send that in. If forms are not dated correctly or not signed or not completely filled out, the submission will be returned to you for corrections, and you will need to resubmit everything again as a packet. Please submit all paperwork in one email. It is very difficult if we get EI-16 and the IFSP, and then a couple hours later or the next day, we're remembering that we didn't submit EI-05 and EI-15. It is too difficult to track the paperwork. So by using this box on EI-16, it's a clean way for you to make sure that you are submitting all the paperwork at the same time. Okay, Lori, we'll move on.
All right. So now that we talked about the forms a little bit, we have a question about what forms you need to send in to the department when the team has identified POLR as the funding source. So I'm going to go ahead and launch this one. So your options are A, EI 5, 15, and 16, B, 5, 15, 16, and 4, or C, 17 and 18. We really need music during these polls. All right, we've got about 50% of you have voted. So I'm going to give you a little bit more time, 10, 15 seconds. All right. So Tracy, we have 19% picked A, 70% B, and 11% C. Did I lose Tracy?
Sorry, I was coughing, so
That's
I
okay.
muted myself.
Okay.
um,
There she is.
so the 19% that picked 05, 15, and 16 forgot about the IFSP. So the correct answer and 70% selected B, which is the three system of payment forms, 05, 15, and 16, and the IFSP, which is 04. Now, that is not to say that if the family has is in need of using their EME and they were able within that 30 days to meet their EME amount and they gave you EI 17 and 18, you can submit that with everything else. But it is not necessary if the family has not met or has not given you 17 and 18. But you can submit all of it together if you have it. But the important ones are 05, which is the consent for insurance, 15, which is your determination of the ability or inability to pay, 16, which is your payment request, and 04, which is the IFSP. Okay.
Tracy, before we
Yes.
go on, there was one clarifying question about when you talked about EI 16 being current.
Mm-hmm.
So if, for example, it's signed on May 12th and submitted on June 4th, is that current enough?
Yeah, that's within the 30 days, and that aligns with the dates on your IFSP. So I guess current means current to the IFSP that has the services that you need POLR funding for. So what we don't want is a form that was submitted previously to be resubmitted. Did that make sense?
Denise, let us know if that did not answer your question. All right. She says, yes, that made sense.
Perfect.
All right.
Okay, so there are a lot of tools available on the website for the system of payment. This is one of them. This is a system of payment form and form submission chart. And this shows what needs to be completed, what system of payment forms need to be completed each step of the process. This slide shows the updated version with the changes on the forms. This form is currently on the website with the old form numbers, but will be updated and posted for July 1st with the current version or the updated version. But this is a little flow chart that just basically kind of tells you what system of payment forms need to be completed and where they need to go. What can stay in the file, what needs to be submitted to the state, and in the different scenarios that you may have. The next slide is a crosswalk of the old forms and the new forms for your reference. I kind of did this for myself because I'm just trying to remember, oh yeah, this is the old one, this is the new one. So this is just until we get used to the new form numbers and kind of connecting it to what we were using in the past. This could be a good reference for you. And then the last one that I have is we had a lot of questions on Tuesday about the process. Where do we, how do I fit all this in with everything else that I'm doing in my 45 days? And I don't know where to fit in all the system of payment discussions and paperwork and such. So this is a timeline. The IFSP process is on the top of the timeline, so that this is basically your IFSP year. So you can see the things that are that need to be done during the first 45 days for the IFSP, and then the redetermination the periodic review, and then the redetermination. On the bottom is the system of payment process and timeline. And so that kind of gives you an idea of where certain things can be done. So you just need to look at your process of how you are fitting everything in within the first 45 days, where it is best to talk to families, looking at the intent of the system of payment forms, and really how the system of payment forms can assist you in your IFSP duties. So, 15 and 05 can help you with the family and child assessment because you're gathering information about the resources and insurance and support systems and things along those lines. EI 16 does not need to be completed until services have been determined, until you decide if you need a POLR provider or if the county board is going to be providing the services. If you need a POLR provider, then you're going to do EI 16. And then with your periodic review, again, you're going to take a look at EI 15. If anything has changed, EI 16, if POLR funding is needed, and EI 05, which isn't on here, but EI 05 needs to be looked at every review and updated with any change on the IFSP. So that's your insurance consent. So this, we can make this available on the website also for you. And if you want this now, just email me and I can send this out to you. But this kind of gives you an idea of where you can kind of fit things in. But you really need to look at your process. Any questions about that, Lori, or clarifications?
Let me just scroll down a little bit.
And again, I know this is very confusing. So, talk to your supervisors. If you need further clarification or assistance, contact your consultant and we can schedule a time to provide some specific TA to your needs and answer any questions that you have specifically to your county, to maybe a family situation.
I do have a couple clarifying questions. Beth said she was thinking on Tuesday, you said that EI 05 and 15 were required at all IFSP reviews, even if nothing changed. Is that correct?
EI 15 only needs to be done at the initial and then every annual after that, unless there has been a change in the family's income, and that needs to be redetermined. But per rule 15, which is the ability, the determination of the ability to pay, only needs to be done once a year. 05, which is the consent for insurance, needs to be updated at every review because there are changes at the review. You're continuing services, you're increasing services, you're decreasing services. So the family should be given the opportunity at that time or any time at a review to decide, do they want to continue using their insurance? Has their insurance information changed for billing purposes? There's multiple reasons why that form, the information on that form can change. So it does need to be reviewed. It does need to be updated, and it does need to be submitted if POLR funding is being used.
All right, so I got some other similar questions. Hopefully we answered those, but let us know if not. And Beth had a follow-up question. She says that the form or the flow chart that's on our screen now doesn't say anything about 05, about signing a new one.
I will have to look at that.
Yeah, and she said that Jennifer said the forms training on My Learning also does not say that. So we will definitely.
We'll take a look at that.
Yeah.
I do know that rule says that it needs to be updated with any change on the IFSP. So, families have the right to decide if they want their insurance billed or not. With the change in services, increasing or decreasing, or even staying the same, just with the timing, a family can change their mind. And I'll give you an example. I'm coming up on the periodic review before my child is turning 3. I have been using my insurance, but my child, and it's my annual before my child turns 3, and I don't want to use my insurance anymore because I want to save my insurance for after my child turns 3, so I don't have to pay a large amount out of pocket. But that example can happen at any review for whatever reason. Maybe the family has decided to get services up and beyond the IFSP privately on their own, and they don't want insurance used. And it may be a situation where the family does not even think about their insurance until their private provider says, oh, your insurance is all used up because you've been billing it for early intervention. So having this ongoing conversation at every review of the IFSP is important to make sure that the family is making that informed decision as to how they want to use their insurance or not. And I have fielded those phone calls and those emails because the families did not stop their insurance with early intervention because they signed the form 9 months ago. Nobody revisited it. They went on their pediatrician's recommendation and got private therapy because their insurance covers it. But early intervention had been using their insurance, and now the family has $1,000 bill from their private insurance because nobody thought about reviewing the insurance information when they added the private insurance or the private services. So it's an ongoing conversation that we need to have with families, and the families need to be updating that with every IFSP review.
All right. Ready to go ahead?
Yes.
Okay. So I think we're ready to share the comments that you typed in at the beginning. So I'm going to just scroll up to those. Okay. So the first one is from Denise. She said she explains EME as being similar to a deductible in an insurance. And Kathleen had the same comment. She said when she begins the conversation for systems payments and the EME portion, she compares it to a deductible with a health insurance plan. And then Kristen said she explains the EME is your cost share portion. It's the amount that you have to pay before you're considered unable to pay and POLR kicks in. And she says that to meet your EME, you can count any necessary medical expenses for your entire household, and that could include medication, glasses, dental, and insurance premiums. And then we had Robin. She said she explains it's a formula we use to look at expenses and will show us the cost share that is their responsibility once the first 55 units are used. And I think those were all of the comments that we received.
Okay. And those are great conversation starters. And giving information, and provoking that conversation with the family and going from there. And I really suggest using the handout that is currently on the website that explains what it is. And it's something that you can leave with the family that they can kind of read on their own, and they may come back with questions at your next visit. And it does again have the link to the worksheet, so the family can kind of play around and and see if it's worth exploring and maybe meeting if they're the high intensity family and have those high services. But again, I feel like I need to stress that the EME is going to be, like I said, less than 2%. I'm less 2% of all our early intervention families in the state. I mean, it is a very, very small percentage of families. What I think out of today's session, service coordinators really need to focus on is the system of payment paperwork, to request the funding, so that your POLR providers can get paid, and not so much focus on the EME. If you have a high intensity family, you're going to know that on the referral. You're going to know that, with your first couple visits. You can contact me prior to that first IFSP, and we can talk this through, and I can give you some support and guidance on what you need to do for that particular family. But I think more importantly, spending your time wrapping your head around, making sure that 05, 15, 16, and the IFSP 04 are completed and put together so that your POLR provider can bill for the early intervention services, that is on the grid on the IFSP. Any other clarifying questions, Lori?
Let me just take one more look.
I'm kind of looking too.
So Priscilla wanted to know, where do we find the handout for the family? And that was on the providers page of the website under System of Payments, and then under Service Coordinator.
Right.
And Cindy wants to know if the POLR provider list will be updated.
We are in the process of doing our state fiscal year 2021 contracts right now. So yes, it will be updated, and probably will be posted. I'm thinking maybe second week in July. We just need to make sure that all the contracts are in and signed before we update it.
Okay.
Oh, hey, Lori.
Yes.
Did you see the question about Stephanie? Because I think that's a really good point.
Oh, okay.
Stephanie asks, what happens if services are provided after the IFSP, but then once POLR is submitted and it is denied? Who pays for the services in that time frame? So this is really important in that POLR funding will not be denied, because under the new system of payment rule, you, as the service coordinator in your IFSP team, are making the decision at the local level as to what services are needed and what the funding source is. So you are deciding out of the 5 funding sources how that service is going to be paid for. Once you put it on the IFSP and that IFSP is signed, that now has become, you have obligated that funding. However you write it, you have obligated that funding source to pay for those services. Your IFSP is a legal document, and once it is signed, everything on that IFSP has been obligated to be provided and to be paid for as you write it. So when you submit the paperwork to DODD, we are just approving what you have already approved. So if you have approved 25 speech visits with a POLR provider with POLR paying for it, then that's what's going to be reflected on the LOA for the provider to bill. Everything that we do up here at the state is contingent on what is written and signed on that IFSP. So everything will be paid for based on what you put on the IFSP. So it is very, very important that you are following the IFSP process, that you are looking at the funding sources, that you are checking your work, making sure that the IFSP is reflecting the conversation and the identification of provider and funding. So Stephanie, thank you very much for bringing up that question. Lori, it looks like that's about all. All the other questions we'll answer in the FAQ.
Okay. All right, then I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up. So before we go over the certificate information, I just wanted to remind you of a couple things. As Tracy said, the questions that you submitted that did not get answered today, we will answer those in the FAQ. And even the questions that did get answered today, those will be included on the FAQ for your reference. And those will be posted under that new tile, the Early Intervention Rules 2019, under the Providers tab. Also, we have one more webinar in our Rocking the Rules series, and that is coming up next Tuesday, the 18th, and that'll be on the IFSP form. It will not be a step-by-step walking through the form and how to fill it out, because that is in our IFSP form training on My Learning, but it will be more of a highlights kind of presentation and then answering the questions that were submitted to us beforehand. So make sure if you haven't registered for that one, you go on the website and you can find the link there and you can go ahead and register. All right, so the certificates, again, those are in the handout section of your dashboard. So you can print those for yourself and for any other participants that are attending with you in your group. And after you print the certificate, you'll need to enter your name, and you'll also need to enter the activation code.